it is. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him?" So they sent word to Joseph saying, "Your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father." When their message came to him, Joseph wept. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. "We are your slaves," they said. But Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Finally, verse 21. "So then, don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. You may be seated in the presence of the living God. On this Family Sunday, allow me to speak from the subject, the danger of a misunderstanding. The danger of a misunderstanding. One reality that every believer has to come to understand is simply this: that whatever God establishes, Satan will always attack. That's important that you understand that, because that's a simple truth that you, some way along your journey, you may begin to understand that whatever God establishes, Satan will always attack. We see that in the very beginning of the Bible, even in the book of Genesis, where from the beginning, when God even establishes family, or even before the first family, Satan is already trying to attack the head of that family. Satan is already trying to split the family away from God, but then he goes on to attack the family. Why? Because Satan will always attack what God establishes. For some of you all, that may give some reasoning of some of the things you have endured or you are enduring, for the simple fact that God is trying to establish something in you and through you. And since God is trying to establish something in you and through you, Satan will attack you. So the news is Satan could care less about you. But the moment you decide to align your life up with what God is trying to establish in your life and through your life, you become a target for Satan. Why? Because Satan will always attack what God has established. And we see that, and many of us may be able to testify on this Family Sunday that we've experienced that even in our own families, that Satan has attacked our family. Satan does this because Satan understands, if I could just tear you all apart, if I could just get you all to turn your back on each other, if I could get you all to stab each other in the back, hey, it'd be easier for me to conquer each and every one of you. But Satan also knows he has a lot of trouble when the family finds a way to come together and stick together. Help me, Lord Jesus. Satan knows that it's harder for him to get at you when he knows your mother has your back. Satan knows it's harder for you to be attacked when your father is covering you in prayer. Satan knows it's harder for attack you when he knows you have family members who are interceding on your behalf. And Satan attacks the family because Satan desires to separate you. And Satan is trying to separate you because Satan understands God is trying to establish something. So that applies even when you begin to pursue the will of God for your life. When you want to experience God's best, what? Satan will attack you. Why? Because the reality is Satan will always attack what God establishes. This reality is even more difficult when God seemingly uses family members to help Satan in that attack. But I want to suggest to you that although there are dangers of misunderstanding, here it is, a godly perspective of my reality helps me better understand what's going on in my life. Let me say that again. A godly perspective of what's going on in my life helps me better understand what God is doing in my life. I like it because when you look at the story of Joseph, the only reason the story ends like it ends is because Joseph has the right understanding of his situation. Joseph has a God-like perspective in the moment. Joseph subscribes to this divine perspective that enables him to understand what's going on. And I want to suggest to you that in every area of your life, we have to do a better job of inviting God into our situations to allow God to help us better understand the situation that we're in. Many times we invite popular opinion. Many times we invite the perspective of others. Sometimes we even invite our own pain to help us understand what's going on. But the best thing you can ever do in any situation is to invite God in. To invite God and allow God to show you how you should interpret what you're going through. And the only reason Joseph's story ends like it does, because he has the right perspective. The only reason his family is still intact at the end of the story is because Joseph has the right perspective. And the danger of a misunderstanding is a misunderstanding could cause you to see your family in the wrong light. As we take a hop, skip, and a jump into our text today, I'm almost done. Genesis chapter 50, watch in verse 15, watch what happens. His brothers, and hold on, for those who may need the background information, let me give it to you. Here it is, Joseph, he was a young man with dreams and vision, and his father had favor on him, and his father gave him what is called a coat of many colors. His brothers didn't like the fact that Joseph was walking around seemingly bragging about the favor that he had. He didn't like the fact that he was talking about the visions and the ideas that God has shown them. And let me pause right there. Families, we have to do a better job of being open to the big ideas of people in our family. Don't allow your life, don't allow what happened to you cause you to knock somebody else's perspective about life. Don't allow, because you hit a certain peak and that was all you could do, don't allow that to stop you from supporting someone else who has the potential to go further than you did. And that's what happened with Joseph. His brothers were mad at him, so they said, let's get rid of him first. They said we would kill him, but then they didn't want to do that. One of the brothers said, let's just throw him in a pit. Joseph gets thrown in the pit, and in that pit, he gets sold into slavery. He ends up in Egypt. He gets favored by God in Egypt. He ends up in jail. He gets out of jail. He goes back to jail. He goes back to the palace, and there it is. Joseph now has favor with Pharaoh. You can go back and read the whole story, but that's the Cliff Notes version. Joseph now has favor with Pharaoh, and now in the land, things have changed. A famine is taking place. And now there's brothers, the same ones that tried to kill him, the same ones that sold him into slavery, now need him. So they're discussing some things. Their father has now died. And watch what they say in verse 15. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was there, they said, what if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him? And right now, can I salute and acknowledge his brothers in this moment? And I need to also let you know, guess what? Everyone's brothers won't be like Joseph. All your family members won't act like Joseph's brothers because there's something good about them. You missed it. Let's go back. Verse 15, watch what he says. What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him? What am I saying? I have to acknowledge and salute to them because they're openly acknowledging that they were wrong. And I got to let you know, everybody in your family won't do that. And I know some of you all can't move past some situations because you're waiting for them to acknowledge that they did you wrong. You're waiting on them to feel sorry. You're waiting on them to come back and apologize to you. But guess what? Sometimes that won't happen. But in this moment, they realize they have done him wrong, and they realize their wrongdoing, it possibly could put their life in jeopardy. So they basically come up with a plan to approach their brother. They come up with this plan. They go to their brother, basically telling them, hey, your father has died. But I like how Joseph handles this situation in verse 18. Watch his divine perspective of this bad situation. Verse 18, his brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. We are your slaves, they said. But Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I not in the place of God? See, the danger of a misunderstanding is simply this. You will misunderstand what God is trying to accomplish in you and through your family. Watch what he says. They're trying to apologize. They're throwing themselves at him, saying, we'll be your slaves because we hurt you. But he pauses and steps back. He's like, wait. Am I not in the place of God? Watch this. The beauty of this, because he has a God perspective, Joseph is not focused on his pain. Joseph is focused on God's providence. Many times in our families, we get in a rut and we can't move beyond certain situations because we are only focused on our pain. Joseph has every right to be bad. Could you imagine Joseph as a child? He's in the bottom of a pit. He has to watch his brothers walk away as he's in this pit. Could you imagine the pain of your brothers selling you into slavery? Could you imagine the pain he had to endure as a slave? He had every right to be mad at him, but Joseph has a way not to focus on the pain, but he focuses on God's providence. And here it is. I'm not telling you to ignore your pain, but I am telling you not to focus on it. You have every right to acknowledge that you are hurt. You have every right to acknowledge that you feel someone hurt you. You have every right to feel some type of way and run to the corner and be sad for a little while. You have every right to do it, but just because you have the right to do it, I'm challenging you because I need you to learn how to move beyond your pain for the sake of your family. Help me, Lord Jesus. Can I say that again? I'm challenging you to learn how to move beyond your pain for the sake of your family. Joseph is able to move beyond his personal pain because he has a God perspective of the situation. And that's why he tells his brothers, am I not in the place of God? That's really good because what Joseph really saying to them is, guess what? You tried your very best, but you couldn't stop what God wanted to do in my life. I like that. Can you be encouraged? You may not come from the best situation. You may not come from the best family. You may not live in the best situation right now, but you can be encouraged. Why? Because even my trifling family members can't stop what God can do in my life. Joseph says, am I not in the place of God? That's what he says to them, because he's not focused on his pain, but he's focused on the providence of God. So the danger of a misunderstanding is we have the wrong perspective of our situations. Even though he knows what they did, he did not focus on what they did. He only focused on what God is doing. And the danger of a misunderstanding will cause you to react in a way that you can't get back. Have you ever been there? I've probably been there too many times, where somebody does something and I've misinterpreted what they were doing or what they are saying and what they meant. And I immediately responded and acted. And now the situation is bad, not because of what initially happened, but because of my response. So that's why the Bible always tells us, in all thy getting, get understanding. And we have to be more gracious with each other as a family. And sometimes, before I respond to you, let me make sure that I heard what I thought I heard. But before I use all my Sunday school words and before I tell you a piece of my mind, sometimes you got to step back and say, before I respond, let me make sure I heard what I thought I heard. Because sometimes we do great damage just simply in our responses and in our actions. And sometimes when we do that, watch what happens. We don't just interrupt our relationship with our family. We can also interrupt our relationship with God. God strategically put Joseph where he was in order to accomplish something greater. And Joseph could have messed it up if he didn't understand what God was doing. And sometimes that's what I need to pray and ask God. God, what are you doing? I think that's my exit. Jalen, let's roll. Sometimes we need to go to God and ask God, like for real, what are you doing? We need to go to learn how to seek God and ask God for a level of understanding, because God, I don't want to get in the way of what you're trying to accomplish. God, I don't want to be the one that causes somebody to stumble. God, I don't want to be the reason my family can be all that it can be. God, what are you doing? And sometimes we get in the way of what God is trying to accomplish because we're operating out of our pain and not operating from the perspective of what God is trying to accomplish. But the beauty of it is here, watch this. Joseph clearly says, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Then he says, don't be afraid, I will provide for you and your children. And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. All of our families will go through situations you just don't understand. But even if we don't understand why someone in our families is doing certain things or acting a certain way, God could give us the right perspective. In seminary, I took a professor, and I had to write an exegetical paper on Genesis chapter 50. And in this particular paper, I had to pitch to the teacher my idea. So I had pitched to him, and I argued that the story of Joseph was not God's will. And he said, you're wrong. And he began to articulate as you walk through the text. When you look at the story of Joseph, wherever Joseph was, they experienced prosperity. So when Joseph went to the house of Pharaoh, the Egypt prospered. And he would argue, why in the world does God side with the empire? And I was saying, because that was never God's perfect will. And he said, okay, I don't agree with you. I'm probably going to fail you, but prove it. So I wrote the paper anyway, and I talked about in my paper the difference between God's perfect will and God's permissive will. Because there are some things God doesn't orchestrate, but God still has a way to take what happened and still be able to accomplish what God desired. I don't know if it was God's perfect will for his brothers to be the type of people. I believe I serve a God who's bigger than that. I believe I serve a God who can get Joseph to Egypt a better way than that. But because of the situation that happened, God still used the situation in order to accomplish something greater. But not only that, because Joseph had the right perspective in the middle of the situation, Joseph became a participant of what God was trying to do, and Joseph was able to change history. Because you have to understand, because now here it is, Joseph brings his brothers. They eventually come and become the children of Israel. Then the Bible tells us, then there arose a king who knew not the God of Joseph. And there's a whole history that goes, that stems out of Joseph's actions. God saves the promised people because of Joseph's understanding of the situation. What am I telling you? The danger of a misunderstanding is you can jeopardize your family's history. You can change the trajectory of your children's lives. You can mess up generations. But when I allow God to give me a fresh perspective of the situation I'm in, God will use you regardless of how bad it is, regardless of how bad it hurt. God will use you to change history. God will use you to create favor for the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. God will use you and your right perspective to bring and mend relationships. God will use you to do tremendous things in the life of all those who are connected to you. I pray on this family Sunday, we're able to work through misunderstandings. I pray on this family Sunday, we don't allow misunderstandings to tear us apart. I pray on this family Sunday, we allow God to give us a different perspective of our families. You might be the one who changed the course of your family's history. What's behind you may not be pretty. What you were born into may not be great. But it does not mean your future can't be brighter. But it requires that I have a right understanding of what God is doing. It requires that I move beyond my pain and focus on God's providence. Because God has a way to take bad situations and bad circumstances and still accomplish something great. Every head bowed, every eye closed. Hey, I just want to say thank you again for joining us this morning in the Freedom Fellowship Virtual Sanctuary. I pray you were blessed by this service and by this message. And I also want to remind you, you can always join us live and in person every Sunday at 2:00 p.m. at 163 Ponce de Leon Avenue, Northeast, right here in Atlanta, Georgia. And as we prepare to go, I want to give you an opportunity to give. Here at Freedom, we believe that whenever we give, it's an opportunity to honor God. It's an opportunity to partner with God. And it's an opportunity to experience the generosity of God's grace. There on the bottom of the screen, you can see multiple ways to give. And we ask and we encourage you to give cheerfully, joyfully, give abundantly. Why? Because that's how God has given to each and every one of us. And when you give, you enable freedom. Continue to fulfill the mission and the vision that God has given uniquely to our church. So I want to thank you in advance for your giving. Again, right there on the screen, there are ways that you can give. And as you're finishing up your giving this morning, I want to leave you with this benediction. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face smile upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift the light of his countenance upon you and grant you his peace. May the Lord bless you when you rise up early and when you settle late, in your labor and in your leisure, in your laughter and even in your tears, until that very day where we should all sit around the feet of Jesus, where there's no sunrise nor sunset. Now go and